I'm telling this because it really happened to me, and it changed the way I understand family and freedom. This isn't fiction or a dramatization. I lived every minute of it. At my mother's granite kitchen island in Skokie, with my mortgage pre-approval letter trembling in my hand and a chipped white mug of coffee sweating on a cork coaster. She smiled and told me I'd never afford my own place. 10 minutes after I discovered she'd opened a credit card in my name. We were gathered for Sunday dinner because she said she had big news. And instead it was my humiliation laid out between the salt cellar and the stack of real estate flyers she always kept by the fruit bowl. She slid the letter back to me with 2 coral-polished fingers, eyes shining like she'd just won a bet. "Sweetheart, you'll drown in PMI before you ever get a key," she said, the oven timer dinging behind her like a tiny bell at a public execution. In that moment, with the kitchen smelling like rosemary chicken and the smoke detector chirping once because the oven ran hot, my mother's betrayal tasted metallic on my tongue. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I grew up in a condo off Toohey and McCormick, one of those beige mid-rise buildings with a lobby ficus that had outlived at least 3 HOA presidents. My mother, Linda, was a North Shore realtor with church lady skirts, aggressive hugs, and a smile people mistook for kindness. She had a way of introducing herself as Linda who gets things done, and in our world, open houses and yard signs and cold calls. Getting things done meant cutting corners so finely you could shave with them. After my dad left when I was 12, she sold the idea of us as a dynamic duo. "Just me and my girl," she'd say, his absence varnished over with "we're better this way." The truth was that just us was a leash. When I was 29, I'd been a nurse at Northwestern Memorial for 6 years. I had saved, not extravagantly, not even perfectly, but methodically, a high-yield savings account, a little in a Roth IRA, a modest emergency fund I guarded like a dragon. My endgame was a starter condo. Nothing fancy. A 2-bed in an older building near Dempster, Skokie, maybe a brick courtyard, vintage radiators, the rattly sound that windows make in a Chicago wind. I could picture a small round table, 2 mismatched chairs, a bookcase with plants leaning toward the light. Dull dreams to some, but to me it was a fortress I could lock from the inside and say mine. The first hairline crack in the fantasy was stupid. A notification from Credit Karma while I stood in line at Mariano's buying eggs and cheap Chardonnay. "Your credit utilization has changed," it said. My stomach pressed into my spine. I checked right there between the deli case and a woman arguing on speakerphone. A department store card I didn't know I had, opened in my name, 2 months prior, maxed out with a balance and a late fee. I could see the address on the account was mine, but the phone number wasn't. I thought, clerical error. Then I thought, maybe the store messed up. I put the wine back because I didn't trust my hands. The second crack was the bank. Chase called to verify an address. I confirmed my unit, my email. "And the secondary mailing address?" the man asked. "What secondary?" He told me, clear as a bell. A P.O. box in Morton Grove had been added to my profile 2 weeks earlier. "We'll remove it," he said. "Did you add it?" "No," I said, and my voice sounded small. I froze my credit. I pulled all 3 reports and watched my stomach drop through the floor. 2 inquiries from a mortgage broker I'd never heard of, a personal loan inquiry, and the department store card that had installed itself in my life like mold. I called my mother because she knows people, because every chaos of my childhood had been solved by her phone calls. An electrician, a locksmith, a dentist. She answered on the second ring, loud music in the background and the clink of glasses. She was always at a networking thing, always working a room. "Hey, my star," she sang. I told her I might be a victim of identity theft. She made the soft, sympathetic noise she uses on clients who want to list their house too high. "That's just computers," she said. "The algorithms go crazy sometimes. Remember the Equifax thing? We'll get it sorted, babe." She told me to come by Sunday for dinner. "Bring your little mortgage papers, let Mama see." That Sunday, she laid out dinner like a magazine spread. White plates, teal napkins, rosemary chicken, the gigantic salad nobody ever finished. There were two people I didn't recognize until she introduced them. Terry, a loan officer with caramel hair and lash extensions, and Ron, a mortgage broker who shook my hand as if trying to check my pulse. "We just want to help," my mother said. "See what's going on." I hadn't invited an audience. I hadn't even decided to tell her everything. But there I was, my pre-approval letter printed on nice paper and my tax returns in a folder, sitting in her perfect kitchen, trying to swallow dread. We started polite. Terry asked about my salary, overtime, bonuses. Ron asked if I had student loans. They used the gentle, coaxing voices of people who want you to feel like a child. My mother refilled my wine glass like she needed the prop. Then Ron asked if he could pull a soft check to clarify some anomalies. "We won't hurt your score," he said with an oaky smile. That's when I pulled out my phone, opened my credit report, and slid it across the island like I was pushing back from a poker table. "Someone already did," I said. And there it was, his company's name. He blinked. My mother's eyes, hot and bright, flicked to his and back to me. She didn't say how. She didn't say oh no. She said, light as air, "Babe, this is why I told you not to go off on your own. Look what happens when you try to DIY. The department store card?" Opened the same week I emailed my mother my W-2 because she'd asked for a second set of eyes. The P.O. box? Registered under my mother's friend's name. The same friend who ran a staging company my mother used for showings. The mortgage inquiries? Two of them were Ron's. I could feel the shape of her around each accident, like fingerprints in wet cement. I stared at her and said very softly, "Why would you do this to me?" She didn't flinch. She patted my hand. "You're not ready," she said. "I'm protecting you from making a stupid decision. Renting is fine at your income level, sweetie." I picture that moment as a slow pan in a movie. The camera moving from the pre-approval letter to the mug with lipstick on the rim to my face to hers. My mother's protection was control, and it had a taste like penny blood in my mouth. Did she open the card? Did she direct Ron to run numbers without telling me? I would learn later what she had and hadn't done in a way that left no room for her favorite defense. "You misunderstood." But right then, the truth felt like a hot wire I knew not to grab with bare hands. I gathered my papers. I could feel the oven heat on my ankles, the chirp of the smoke alarm again, the scratch of the chair legs on tile. "I'm going to ask you one more time," I said. "Did you open that card?" She tilted her head. She smiled. Why would I do that? As if the answer wasn't stamped all over my life. That night, I filed an identity theft affidavit with the FTC and a report with the Skokie police. I froze my credit again and placed fraud alerts. I printed every bank statement, every email, every text with Linda asking for my documents. People think the worst part of identity theft is the money. And that's bad, sure. But the worst part is the way you start seeing yourself as a set of numbers that anyone can rearrange. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling fan turning, the sound of the yellow line train faint through my window, and I cried like a broken pipe. Then I stopped. I do not know where cold resolve lives in a human body, but mine curled into the space where the crying had been and stayed. 2 days later, Terry called, chirpy as a morning show. "Just wanted to touch base," she said. "Linda said you're feeling overwhelmed." She wanted to partner and keep options open. I told her not to call me again. She did. I recorded it. In Illinois, that's illegal unless both parties consent. So I didn't use the recording later, but I remember the cadence like a song. "We can start with a cross-collateralized product to keep your DTI low," she said, a fancy way of saying a leash. I could feel the net tightening, not around my finances but around my choices. I stopped answering calls from anyone I met through my mother. My phone felt like a weapon someone else was holding. The hospital posted a travel nurse opening. ICU nights at University of Chicago Medical Center, hazard pay, a short-term contract with a number attached that made my brain fizz. Nurses leave their bodies for shifts like that. 12 hours that stretch to 14, fluorescent lighting, alarms that burrow under your skin. But money is a clean kind of oxygen if you've been strangled. I signed the contract. I bought compression socks and a second pair of clogs. If I couldn't move through the world as my mother's puppet anymore, I would become a metronome. Save, sleep, work, save. I moved back into the spare bedroom of my friend Jamie's place in Rogers Park to kill my rent, and the first night, I sat on the floor with a notebook and wrote, "Condo cash 10 minutes from her." The words looked like a threat and a prayer. I didn't tell Linda about the travel contract. I told her I was taking a break from house hunting. She took me to Walker Brothers in Wilmette for pancakes and spoke very loudly about a client's daughter, who finally accepted the renter mindset. She made it sound like a diagnosis. She invited me to an open house for a gleaming townhome in Glenview so I could visualize success, and then introduced me to the listing agent as my girl who's not quite there yet. I let her think I was folding, because sometimes the smartest way to move is silent. On my lunch breaks at the hospital, I combed Cook County scavenger sale results and tax delinquent properties. I made a spreadsheet. I learned new languages: lien priority, special assessments, eviction risk, tender of redemption. A patient's monitor beeped. I documented vitals. On a 5-minute pause, I read the bylaws of a condo association off Greenleaf with a lawsuit pending over a leaky roof. People think real estate is about granite countertops and light and bright. It's also about legal landmines. I learned to step around them. I joined a Facebook group where small investors traded war stories, and one man named Sosa sent me a PDF titled Due Diligence 101 with a note that said, "Don't let anyone older than you tell you what you can have." Months stretched. I became a creature of fluorescent nights and crumpled dollar bills for the vending machine. I picked up PRN shifts at a rehab hospital in Lincoln Park. I sold my car. Parking tickets, insurance, and gas were luxuries disguised as necessities, and lived on the CTA, the hum of the red line in my bones. When I wasn't at the hospital, I notarized documents on weekends, $5 here, $10 there, after taking an online course and stamping my commission number like a tiny revolution. I rented out my weekend bag on a peer-to-peer app one never knew existed. I learned I could live on less than I thought if my hunger was pointed at something sharp. The first time I walked through the building that would become my home, the hallway smelled like pine sol and old carpet. It was on Central Street in Evanston, a 1960s brick low-rise with chipping cream paint and a laundry room that had not witnessed joy in decades. The unit itself was tired, beige wall-to-wall carpeting with a dark path worn from the front door to the kitchenette, a sliding glass door to a small balcony that faced a maple tree where squirrels conducted small conferences. 2 bedrooms. Low HOA. The listing photos were gray. The sellers were out of state. The last buyer had fallen through because the HOA had just announced a special assessment for tuck pointing, which scared people who needed a mortgage. Cash buyers didn't blink. I blinked, then stopped blinking. I made an offer through an attorney and an LLC I set up with LegalZoom in a name my mother wouldn't recognize. I wired earnest money from a high-yield account that had grown fat on overtime. I scheduled an inspection and took off work to follow the inspector room to room with my notebook. The building creaked when the L rumbled by. He pointed at a water stain and said, "This is old, but keep an eye." He tested an outlet and frowned. I wrote GFCI and a star. I was not looking at granite or staging or the fantasies my mother sold people. I was looking at a place where I could put my body down and not owe anyone a performance. We were within days of closing when my attorney emailed me a courtesy copy of an email chain from the listing agent to the HOA president. I scrolled through on my phone hunched in the employee lounge. There, in the last message, was a name I knew better than my own. Linda. Not mine. My mother's. She had looped herself in as a local realtor advocating for property values, and was asking questions about the special assessment with a weird solicitous tone I recognized from 100 calls. My stomach snapped shut. She had no actual standing. She had injected herself anyway. I didn't confront her. I called the HOA president instead. Her name was Doris, and she was 72 with the voice of a person who has seen every possible human mess and come out the other side. "Your mother has called me 3 times, she said. She's very concerned a cash buyer might not be stable. The pause did things to my blood pressure that would have made triage nervous. I took a breath and said, "I'm the cash buyer." Silence. Then Doris laughed a laugh that sounded like a door creaking open to a sunnier room. "Well then," she said, "I'll tell her to mind her own beeswax. Some people wage war with lawsuits or fists. I had paperwork. I had time. I had a mother who didn't know I had a spine. And I had a closing date circled in red on my wall calendar, a moving truck held by deposit, and a set of keys I hadn't touched yet because I wanted the first time to feel like a ceremony. Which is why what happened next made my hands sweat like I was walking into an operating room without gloves. I learned, almost by accident, that the assistant to the listing agent was my mother's newest mentee, a girl named Kelsey who wore a permanent smile like a uniform and wrote Instagram captions about boss babe energy. The day before closing, a neutral email came from the agent's office. "Could we move the time by an hour? Our conference room is booked." I said fine. An hour is nothing. But an hour is an opening if someone wants to make a spectacle. I arrived at the title company in Skokie on Grosse Pointe Road with a cashier's check burning a hole in my bag, and the receptionist led me to a glass-walled room. I could see into the hallway. I could see my hand shaking slightly when I set my bag down. I could also see my mother coming down the hall in heels that rang out on the tile like tiny hammers. She had not been invited. She brought a bouquet. The last thing you expect to see, an hour before you sign papers that change your life, is your own mother in your war room bearing flowers and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and the last thing you expect to feel, as your attorney stands to greet her, is the old fear touching the back of your neck like a cold hand. I stood because he stood. "Well, this is a surprise," he said, which was polite code for "you can't be here." My mother swept into the room like it was her living room and set the bouquet, lilies loud and sweet, on the end of the table like she was christening a ship. "I heard my girl was making a big mistake," she said, and behind her Kelsey hovered, almost vibrating with the thrill of proximity to drama. My attorney, a quiet man with tweed energy, cleared his throat. "This is a private closing," he said. My mother made her favorite tight face, the one that says "how dare you." "I'm her mother," she said. "I'm here to help." It all could have spun out. It could have become one of those screaming scenes people film on their phones. Instead, I took the bouquet in both hands like a gift I would not keep, carried it to the receptionist, and asked if she'd like to brighten the lobby. I came back to the conference room and closed the glass door gently but firmly. My mother pressed her palm to the glass. "Honey, please," she mouthed. I sat. I signed. The check felt like a weight leaving my bag and landing neatly on the table. The stack of papers grew a small mountain that said "I own this." My heart thudded in my throat, but my handwriting was steady. When it was done, the title agent shook my hand and said, "Congratulations, homeowner." And that was a sentence I thought I might never hear. I stepped into the hallway. My mother was waiting like a stage actor in the wings, smile broad, eyes bright. "This is emotional," she said, and then, with a small laugh and a tilt of her head, "You know, I could have gotten you a better deal." That was always the punchline with her. Not "I'm proud." Not "I'm sorry." Always "I could have done it better. Therefore you should not have done it at all." I tucked the keys into my pocket. I could feel their teeth against my thigh like a secret I didn't have to share. "It's 10 minutes from your house," I said. "Just like you advised." She blinked. She hadn't known. She hadn't understood that proximity could be independence and a weapon. "I'll walk over," I said. "Make sure you're okay with my parking." Her jaw clicked shut. For 1 second, the mask slid and I saw pure, boiling indignation. "How dare you? How dare you do something without me near me that I can't control?" Her teeth flashed. Then the smile came back on like a light. "Don't get cocky," she said. "Houses always need something. Call me when it breaks." I smiled back. "I'll call a licensed professional," I said, and for the first time in my adult life, I understood that a boundary can taste sweet. I drove to the condo with a U-Haul the size of a small whale and 2 friends, Jamie and her cousin, with a playlist that made us yell sing down central. The maple tree out front had lost half its leaves already, and the building looked softer in the fall light. We carried in boxes, and a neighbor with a Cubs hat held the door and said, "You're the cash buyer, right?" My shoulders tightened. "Doris talks," he said, laughing. "Welcome." We ordered Lou Malnati's and ate on the floor because I didn't have a table yet, and when the lights of the L flickered through my blinds, I felt a joy so clean it made me dizzy. I had keys. I had walls. I had a balcony where the squirrels conducted their tiny parliaments. But revenge doesn't end with a certificate of title. Revenge is patient and legal and, when done right, boring to the people who aren't you. I had filed my reports. I had printed my evidence. You should file a complaint with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. Sosa texted me because of the mortgage pulls. If he ran your credit without consent, that's a violation. If she directed him, she's complicit. The law is slow, it is also heavy, and once it starts rolling, it's hard to stop. I made an appointment with a consumer protection attorney and slid a stack of paper across his desk at the Daily Center, like a person in a movie sliding a folder full of photographs. He scanned. He nodded. He asked questions like the ones they teach in some cold room, where people practice taking other people apart. "How did he get your social?" he asked. I told him about emailing my W-2 to my mother for her second set of eyes. He made a noise like a judge marking a scorecard. "Did you sign anything authorizing the checks?" "I did not." "Did your mother connect you to him?" "Yes." He sat back. "We'll send letters," he said. "We'll see who starts sweating first." The letters went out on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my mother left me a voicemail that started, "Honey, I'm surprised," and ended, "We don't take family to court." She said I was making something out of nothing. She said I'd embarrass her in the community. She said we're a team. She said many things, but what she didn't say was I didn't do it. The broker, Ron, sent a robin's egg email full of words like misunderstanding and industry standard and soft pull. My attorney wrote back in lawyerese that tasted like steel. Without written authorization from Ms. Any inquiry constitutes a violation. He CC'd his boss. He CC'd everyone. Terry tried the soft route first. "Let's get a coffee and talk this out." Then the hard one when I didn't bite. "You're hurting people's livelihoods." I was hurting the way you hurt when you take your hand out of a wolf's mouth. I installed a peephole camera, a small circle that made my door look like it had a blinking eye. I didn't expect my mother to come by. I didn't expect the woman who needed to control everything to underestimate how much she'd trained me to watch. On a Sunday 2 weeks later, a notification pinged my phone while I was hanging a cheap curtain rod over the sliding door. Motion. I tapped. There she was, a figure in a rust-colored coat, hair perfect, holding a foil pan. She looked up and smiled directly at the camera, the audacity of a person who believes the world is a stage. She rang. I let it ring. She knocked. "Honey," she called. "I made lasagna." She set the pan down on the doormat and left. I waited a full hour before I opened the door. I put the lasagna in the trash. I took a long shower, the water drumming my scalp like rain on a roof, and didn't cry. The old me would have. The new me turned the lock and felt it catch and hold. Word gets around in real estate. People think it's about glossy flyers and open houses, but it's a village with trumpets. The letters that went out multiplied into whispers. "Did you hear? I heard she's suing. I heard she got a condo in cash." My mother's smile got tighter. At church, she told people I was taking some space, like bravery and disobedience were synonyms. She brought casseroles to my aunts. She posted more on Instagram. Sold signs, bronzed cheeks, captions about hustle. But in the office of her brokerage, in the world behind the pictures, compliance asked questions. Someone from IDFPR called Ron. Terry's boss called Terry. The local realtor board scheduled a quiet meeting. My attorney sent me a calendar invite with a subject line that made my lips go numb. Informal conference. Unauthorized credit inquiry. It took place in a windowless room with a long table and a coffee urn that tasted like it had been boiled since 1997. I wore a blazer I borrowed from Jamie that made me look like someone who knew how to speak in rooms like that. My mother wore black and pearls and a smile that said I will not be moved. Ron looked smaller than he had at my mother's island. Terry didn't come. A woman with a legal pad and a pen that clicked led us through a forest of polite words. Did you authorize? At any point did you consent? How did he acquire the social? When asked directly, my mother tilted her head and said, I might have forwarded something, but it was to help. The legal pad woman didn't nod. She wrote, Ms. Did you provide your social to your mother for the purpose of mortgage inquiries? No, I said. Do you have documentation that the W-2 was sent? Yes. Do you have documentation that Mr. pulled your credit on date and date? Yes. The pen clicked. Click, click. The sound of a nail being tapped into a wall. There are moments when adults become children in front of you, and you never forget. The legal pad woman looked at my mother and said, This is a fiduciary field. If you derived or expected to derive benefit via commission from transactions resulting from unauthorized access, that's serious. My mother's mouth did the thing it does before she cries, a wobble then a clamp. I was trying to protect her, she said, and for the first time since I was a teenager, I heard something like true fear in her voice. Protecting had always been her shield. But it could not cover this. Sanctions are paper and time. They do not come with gongs. A letter would be drafted. A fine would be considered. A temporary suspension was on the table. My mother stood slowly, the room suddenly too small for her height. I need a moment, she said, and walked out, her heels softer now on the carpet. I sat very still, the coffee in my cup cold and bitter, and thought about the girl I had been at her island, humiliated between the salt cellar and the flyers, and I wanted to go back and touch her face and say hold on. On the day the notice arrived, suspension pending review, remedial ethics training required, a fine that would eat a commission check. My mother sent me a text that said simply, You win. I stared at it in the light of my kitchen, the box of cabinet knobs I'd bought from a hardware store on Dempster open and shining. I didn't answer. Winning is a strange word for finally having what was always yours without someone else's hand on it. I set the phone down. I unscrewed the old knob from the cabinet by the stove. I screwed the new one on tight and straight, the small satisfying torque like a safe clicking closed. A week later, I hosted a housewarming. I bought folding chairs from Target and borrowed a cooler from a nurse who keeps one in her trunk like a fun uncle. Jamie brought sangria and Sosa brought a pie and Doris brought an HOA newsletter with an extra exclamation point next to Welcome New Owner. I opened the sliding door to the balcony and let the November air in. The maple rattled its last coins of leaves. In the middle of laughter, the peephole camera pinged again motion. I didn't look. I poured more sangria. I told the story of the first night I'd slept in my own place. The train, the quiet, the disbelief. People hugged me. No one said you win. Around 9 after people left, I took the trash out to the chute and passed a woman in the hallway I recognized from the building directory. Mrs. Rizzo for B. She had the faint blue vein hands of someone who has put whole lives to bed. You're Linda's girl, she said. I braced. I'm mine, I said, and she smiled, a small knowing thing like we'd agreed on a password. Good, she said. It's quieter that way. I saw my mother one more time before winter iced everything down. It was at Jewel Osco on Niles Center Road, the world's ugliest fluorescent opera, and we ran into each other by the rotisserie chickens. She held a carton of raspberries. I held a bag of onions. We did the dance of two people calculating escape routes. How's the place? She asked, like nothing had happened, like the cliff we'd driven off together had broken only on my side. Solid, I said. We stood there with the heat lamps hissing and the world moving around us in squeaky carts and small arguments, and for a moment we were ordinary. A mother and daughter making face-sized talk about poultry. She reached out like she might touch my arm and didn't. You could have told me, she said. You could have asked, I said. She nodded, a slow, watery thing. I didn't think you would do it, she said, meaning not the condo but the war. I did, I said, meaning both. On a white morning in January, I woke to snow pushing against my windows like someone breathing close. I made coffee in a cheap machine that made a gurgling sound like it was trying to make me laugh. I stood at the sliding door with the mug in both hands like a small animal of heat and watched the square of maple branches become lace. My phone buzzed with a new email. IDFPR's final notice. Suspension confirmed for 90 days. Fine payable within 30. Completion of ethics training required prior to reinstatement. I read it twice. I set the mug down on the sill. There was no joy in it. There was a heavy, quiet correctness, like furniture in a room finally moved where it belongs. I put on boots and a hat and walked the 10 minutes to my mother's condo because I could. My breath made steam. The world made its small winter sounds, plow blades, a distant dog. I stood across the street and looked up at her window. A lamp burned gold. I thought about walking up the stairs and ringing her bell and telling her the news like it was weather. I thought about going back to my place and making pancakes just because I could dirty a pan that no one else would complain about. Instead, I reached into my pocket and closed my hand around my keys. They bit my palm, a bright, small pain. I knew then that the revenge I'd wanted, her humiliation, her ruin, was not what I had collected. I had taken back my name, my money, my future, and parked them 10 minutes from her front door. That night, I arranged the last boxes along my wall like small mausoleums to the life I'd shed and opened the one labeled kitchen, miscellaneous. At the bottom was the cork coaster from her island that I'd accidentally taken the night of the dinner. The one with the small coffee ring ghosted into it like a planet. I set it on my own counter. I put my own chipped mug on it. I said out loud, to no one but the mapled air, "This is a real story," and heard how quiet my home was when there was no one there to tell me I couldn't afford it, no one sneaking my numbers into someone else's hands. The lilies she brought to the title office, once aggressively alive, had turned to a sweet, damp rot in the lobby of that building days after the closing. The receptionist told me later when I came back for a copy of something I can't even remember now. "We had to throw them out," she said. "They were too much." I nodded and thought of how some gestures are flowers covering a trapdoor, and how time, like a steady, patient nurse, peels the petals back until there is only the truth underneath. On warm afternoons, when the L sings itself toward Linden and the wind moves through the maple like a hand in hair, I sit on the small balcony with my feet on the rail and my cup on that stolen cork planet and watch the squirrels hold their wonky parliaments. Sometimes, when I hear a car door slam with the efficiency of my mother's, my stomach flickers, then settles. The door opens. It is not her. It will be again someday. The proximity is a choice I made with clear eyes. I do not owe her my door. I do not owe her my numbers. I keep the pre-approval letter, the one she pressed back across her island at me, folded in the drawer with my socks, a relic from a small religion I don't follow anymore. On the back, in my own handwriting from that first night at Jamie's, the words are still there, eased by time but legible. Condo. Cash. 10 minutes from her. When I read them, I remember the metallic taste of that dinner, the sound of heels in a title office hallway, the click of a new knob, the weight of keys in my pocket like a handful of honest coins. I remember my mother's palm on glass as I closed the conference room door, a motion that looked like love and felt like a demand. In the end, the revenge was not proving her wrong, though I did, and loudly enough that her world heard it. It was learning how quiet my life could be when I stopped living in the echo of her certainty. It was paying in cash and sleeping alone and buying cheap curtains and cheap knobs and a coat rack I assembled with a tiny Allen wrench until my fingers hurt, and every ache said, "This is mine." On the first night the snow began to recede, leaving gray islands in the parking lot like peeled patches on a scalp. I stood in my kitchen and set my keys on the counter. The sound they made was small and clean and complete. The end.